The Star and D'Amico Show is brought to you by cheapesttshirts.ca. If you're looking for quality gear without overpaying, shop cheapesttshirts.ca. Huge selection for men, women, and kids. Tees, hoodies, headwear, bags, and more. Proud Montreal business. Order today, ship today, delivery tomorrow. That's cheapesttshirts.ca. Local, fast, and affordable. Brought to you by instacustoms.com. Do you need custom gear from a local Montreal business? Instacustoms.com has you covered. Custom shirts, hoodies, hats, and more made your way. Fast turnaround, great quality, and proudly Montreal-based. Check out instacustoms.com. Brought to you by Cabletel. For trusted alarm systems in Quebec and Eastern Ontario, choose Cabletel. Over 20 years of expert installation and top-tier protection for homes and businesses. Check out Cabletel.com. Email them info@Cabletel.com. It's Cabletel. Peace of mind you can count on. Brought to you by Morella's Steakhouse. Looking for an unforgettable night out? Morella's Steakhouse on Highway 132. It's just 15 minutes from Montreal, serving up premium cuts and bold flavors, and no tax on your bill. Book your table tonight at morellassteakhouse.ca. Taste excellence tonight. Brought to you by Little Bear. Give your pet the best with Little Bear Pet Supply. It's a proudly family-owned business here in Montreal for over 30 years. Chuck, Evie, and their all-star staff have you taken care of with all the top brands at the best prices, and they really care for your pets. Shop online at littlebearonline.com or visit them on St. Catherine across from Westmount Square. It's Little Bear Pet Supply. Brought to you by McLean's Pub. Head over to McLean's Pub, 1210 Peel Street in the heart of downtown Montreal. Great food, cold drinks, and big games on all the screens. McLean's Pub, good times and great company. Marco D'Amico and Sean Starr with you on the Star and D'Amico Show. Thanks so much for being with us. Welcome to the Olympic break. It's on and on in a big way. That doesn't mean we go quiet, though. Wherever you consume this content, we're going to be here to fill the void because there are actual things to talk about. A reminder that on youtube.com, Star and D'Amico will be with you in the aftermath following Canada's Olympic opening men's hockey tournament game when they take on Czechia coming up on February 12th this week. We'll be here live at 3 p.m. To recap that game as Canada marches for a gold. Marco, lots to get into. Let's put a little focus on Patrik Laine. We know for a minute now that he's been practicing. He's been practicing with a regular jersey, but yet he hasn't found his way back into Martin St. Louis' lineup card. Will that change? Will he change teams? What's the likeliness that there are teams, plural, that could be interested in Patrik Laine at this point of his career as he returns from an injury again?
Well, I don't think they're running to the Canadiens to get a guy like Patrik Laine, but what I would say is, in the right circumstance, yes, there could be. I would expect there to be interest in Patrik Laine because goal scorers are hard to come by at this point. There's a couple of things happening on the market that we can kind of dive into, but the first thing I will say is I strongly believe that Patrik Laine will be traded before the Montreal Canadiens receive the New York Islanders at home on the 26th of February.
So the Canadians get back to practice then on February 17th. And I would imagine this is like a good news scenario where, the general manager in the front office of the Montreal Canadiens can really start to plot and strategize between now and the 6th of March. But there's been like some reporting about, Patrik Laine's cap hit, Habs salary retention. And if the Canadians are so inclined to make a deal and find a partner, what do you make of the possibility that the Canadians would actually have to sweeten the pot to make Laine more attractive in a transaction?
Remember when the Canadians would have had to give a second-round pick to get rid of Carey Price's contract?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I say about that.
Right. Not too fast.
This is the way I say it. The rental market right now is so razor thin. Like the most identifiable rental that could have been traded was traded in Artemi Panarin, right?
Yep.
And then you look at the list, a lot of the potential rentals off the board. Alex Tuch going nowhere, ladies and gentlemen. Buffalo wants to make the playoffs, and they're willing to risk losing him for nothing. I can guarantee you that. So you can forget that. In terms of forwards after that, the grand majority of the forwards that are potentially rentals play for teams that are either in playoff spots or one of the hottest teams in the NHL. You look at the Seattle Kraken, Jordan Eberle, You look at Jaden Schwartz. You look at Jared McCann. Well, Seattle's going to have a conversation with those guys to see what's going on, but they're in a playoff spot. So I don't think they're going to empty everything to make those kinds of moves. And again, you'd be looking at those players more as like the tweener, middle six kind of guy that you could put on the second wave of your power play. And then the same applies for a team like Columbus Blue Jackets, for example, who are on an absolute tear since Rick Bowness took over as head coach. They went from being last in the East to being the ninth team. They're right there, knocking on the door. So that puts in doubt the availability of guys like Charlie Coyle, Boone Jenner, you name it. So those are rentals right off the market. And then you look at the Utah Mammoth in a playoff spot looking to add. So that basically makes Nick Schmaltz practically unavailable. Barrett Hayton isn't going anywhere if they're making a playoff push because Utah absolutely wants to make the playoffs. So you're removing those options. Go and look at the list. Like even guys like Jean-Gabriel Pajot or Anders Lee. I forget if Lee is a free agent this year or the next. But these are guys that were talked about at the beginning of the season that the Islanders would probably look to leverage to trade if they were out of a playoff spot. Well, they're in a playoff spot. Same thing applies to Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin in Pittsburgh. Everybody was like, they'll probably want to be on another team come this time. They're, right in there. They're one of the top three teams in the Metro right now. So all these rentals that everybody thought could be available, it's players with term. So if you're looking for a no-risk move and you have a lot of cap space, this is where Patrik Laine could become interesting because retaining 50% on Patrik Laine means that he would count for $4.35 million. The Canadiens are willing to do that, right? I think there would only be a sweetener involved if the Canadiens didn't want to retain anything or didn't want to retain all the way up to 50%. But it's the Montreal Canadiens. They'll retain 50%. I'm not worried about that. It then becomes a question of fit. It becomes a question of timing, and it becomes a question of who you're trading with.
It's interesting when you bring up the teams that perhaps need a Patrik Laine, right? We look at the worst power play teams in the league. It's a bizarro situation, is it not? The best team in the NHL has the worst power play with all of that talent, like cheat code players, as we like to refer to Cale Makar and the Nathan McKinnons of the world, right? They have the goal scoring and they've got the depth, but yet their power play hovers around 50% in Colorado. You talk about Utah, you talk about the New York Islanders. I mean, these are the podium in honor of the Olympics as the worst power play units in the National Hockey League at the Olympic break. The Montreal Canadiens, brother, are 7th in the league in power play efficiency this season. Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Everything you talked about is, as it relates to Laine about, you wouldn't be surprised if the Canadiens move him before they play the Islanders on the 26th out of the break. What about the ability to maybe keep this guy? Is it not worth it in terms of looking for a goal, trying to win a playoff series, trying to win an overtime game in a playoff round, adding depth to the second wave of the power play? I mean, it is at the end of the day, I guess I'm asking, is there simply just no room for Patrik Laine based on how this team has played this year?
If the Canadiens didn't have, the 7th best power play in the NHL, I'd ask the question.
Right.
And, to a degree, I think one of the things you have to look at is the Canadiens have a certain identity of being able to play with speed and pace and competitiveness. And I just don't think that's Patrik Laine's game. Like, if you're not going to be those things, then you have to be physical, right? You have to be able to play a role. And I just don't feel like there's a role for him on the power play on this team. There was last year, but when you add Ivan Demidov, when you add Oliver Kapanen, when you have other players that are in the lineup that weren't last year, like Kirby Dach, for example, that pushes a player a little out to the periphery. And I think that's exactly what's happened. The Canadiens are second in goals for in the NHL. So it's not like they're starving for goals. What they're starving for are specific role players that are able to bring it at 5-on-5 in the neutral zone and defensively as well as offensively. And I think that's what they're looking for, right? And so I just don't, as much as I feel like Patrik Laine could still very much help a team in the NHL, I just don't feel like at this current stage it would be with the Montreal Canadiens, simply just because it would scrap a lot of the dynamic. I wouldn't want to put him with Jake Evans, and I don't think the Canadians have an appetite of breaking up the Phil Deneau, Gallagher, Anderson line anytime soon. You're not going to break up the kid line, and putting him on the top line when clearly from what we've seen, they need a winger on that line that's able to go in and do the dirty work along the boards and puck
Agreed.
retrievals and whatnot. I just don't know that fits. And that's, again, this is not a detriment to Patrik Laine as a player. It's ironic as Canadians fans, none of them have seen Patrik Laine fully healthy since he's been acquired. So to me, I think that there's still more there, and I think he's going to be motivated in his contract year to make something happen. But for everything that I've heard, and in no disrespect to the player, you want a certain level of roster flexibility. You want a certain level of cap flexibility in case a move does come down the line. Like, you don't waive Sammy Blais a day before the roster freeze just to get him some ice time in Laval. And he has looked good in Laval. You're also accumulating cap space over the 3 weeks that they're off. There's a reason for that flexibility. And so the Canadians now have about $1 million in cap space. But if they were to retain and trade Patrik Laine, well, what does that look like? And so the crux of this conversation now becomes, at what cost?
And in a way, I know these guys make a lot of money and they have a lot of pride, and they're the elite of the elite at what they do. But
Mhm.
I'll be honest, man, like I kind of feel for Patrik Laine, a very turbulent career for a lot of different reasons. We're not going to get into that. But it seemed to me like authentic Marco that when he came to Montreal, like he found a comfortable place. He seemed to be happy. I think the organization and the players in that room embraced him with wide open arms. And it was injury, and then it was injury, and then he comes back and he helps them push for the playoffs against Washington, defying all the odds, and then is hoping, to your earlier point about a contract year, maybe he's thinking psychologically big things are coming. And then he was just dealt with his injury like 5 games into the season. And now we're talking about a guy that, you know, maybe salary retention and being moved on. Like, I guess at the end, right? He's still, when healthy, right? You still believe Patrik Laine is a viable NHL player.
Absolutely. I think he could fit, on a top 9 given power play time and still be effective. I sincerely believe that. It's going to take a team that I believe is going to be stronger down the middle than the average. And I think that's really where it comes into it, right? And so look across the league. Look at the teams that could use a Patrik Laine. The Utah Mammoth, their power play has been anemic since Logan Cooley went down with an injury a couple of months ago. The New York Islanders, who I can tell you have had interest in a guy like Patrik Laine in the past, looking for a scoring winger, are the New York Islanders. So there is a possibility. They have a lot of cap space as well. You could also look to the LA Kings.
Mm.
The LA Kings have a boatload of cap space right now, obviously, from being able to move on from a player like Phil Deneau. They just took on about 5.8 million in salary for acquiring Artemi Panarin, but they've
Yep.
been able to accrue that cap space for 6 weeks, that extra 5.5 million. So the LA Kings have a fair share of cap room as well when you look at their projected cap space, and they're going to be looking to add. They're primarily looking to add at center, but their deadline cap space is $15.7 million. So just take that into consideration. Even if they were to go and try to get, I don't know, a center at like 7 or 8 million, they'd still have a prorated $8 million to be able to spend. If you're willing to throw a future considerations or a 7th round pick at a 50% Patrik Laine when there are no scoring forwards available in the rental market, it could happen. It could, and this is why I'm saying in the right situation, it could very well happen. You look at, those 3 teams, those are 3 teams in a playoff spot right now. Right? Those are 3 teams that, push comes to shove, have to make a move. And if you're the LA Kings, for example, you have to follow up the Artemi Panarin trade with something else. Oh, and I'm mistaken. Sorry. The Kings are just out of a playoff spot.
Just outside.
Yeah, they're 9th right now. And so
Yeah.
ever more so the reason, because they're one of the teams that has the least amount of ability to score at this time,
Yep.
but they do have a defined center line, right? You put a guy like Patrik Laine potentially with a guy like, Quinton Byfield, who is a sublime playmaker on the rush. What happens? We see what happens. And right now, they're -15 in goal differential. They need those goals. In terms of goals for 146. So they definitely need some goals, because the Vancouver Canucks, who are dead last in the NHL, have scored 3 more goals, albeit with 1 more game played, than the Los Angeles Kings. That's no bueno. That's no bueno. So you have to factor that in. So yes, there is a market for Patrik Laine. The Canadiens are confident that they can make a move for Patrik Laine, and not to just get rid of him, like I see some fans writing. They want to put him in a position where he's going to be able to make himself valued, so that he could potentially get a contract for next season in the NHL. They're not just going to throw him away. They want to have him land somewhere where he's going to be comfortable and do right by the player.
So there you go. If you like what you hear, don't forget you can slide over to our YouTube channel where you just like and subscribe. It helps spread the word of Star and D'Amico and your daily Montreal Canadiens coverage. And of course, wherever you get your favorite audio podcast platforms like iHeartRadio. So basically, to recap, uh, no teams are lining up for Patrik Laine today, but there are
Mhm.
some logistical landing spots, and
Yeah.
highlighting Utah, the Islanders, the LA Kings, and that maybe ultimately between now and before March 6th, maybe before the Canadiens get back to play the New York Islanders on the 26th of this month, Patrik
Mhm.
Laine could be wearing a new uniform.
Well, and again, there's other teams as well. They've been linked. He's been linked to a team, for example, like the Edmonton Oilers, where
Yeah.
the Canadiens could potentially retain 50% of his salary and then trade him for a player with a contract. Like it was suggested, Andrew Mangiapane for Patrik Laine at 50%, so that would allow the balancing act to happen between the Montreal Canadiens and the Edmonton Oilers from a salary perspective, and then having a Patrik Laine be set up by a Leon Draisaitl or a Connor McDavid. I mean, you're off to the races, right?
Yeah.
But it's looking at that dollar amount, right? If Andrew Mangiapane makes 3.6 million, Patrik Laine would make 4.35 in that situation, so they would actually gain 700,000 in salary. How does that work? Can they make that happen? I don't necessarily see it, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. A team that could make more sense in this regard, probably the Calgary Flames. They just lost Jonathan Huberdeau for the season.
Yep.
So if they even need to dip into LTIR to make it happen, they probably could.
Laine for
And it wouldn't.
Kadri. Let's go.
Yeah.
Money out, money in. Money out, money in, brother.
So I do think that there are possibilities where even teams that are looking to make cheap ads that have all the cap space in the world could potentially look in that direction just to bring in some additional scoring. So this is why I'm saying, on paper, it doesn't look likely. But when you think about the creativity that Kent Hughes has shown in the past of being able to make moves for contracts and not falling prey to cap, pressures of having to add,
Mhm.
a sweetener. If the Canadians add a sweetener, it'll probably be a low mid round, like a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. That's what I think. I was asked on radio whether it would be a 2nd or a 3rd round pick. Forget
Oof.
that. At
Oof.
this stage of the season, the
Yeah.
Canadians are more likely to get an asset for Patrik Laine than to
Wow.
pay a pick that high.
Wow.
Like,
I
it's not
believe that.
happening.
I
You're
mean, I can't imagine a second round pick for no. I mean, that just
y
doesn't compute.
4.3 million dollars at this stage of the NHL season is worth 900,000 actual dollars. It's a drop in the bucket. It's a minimum salary player. And
Yes.
you look at teams, for example, that have been accruing cap space since the beginning of the season. It's not by chance, but like I'll throw a name out there. We've already talked about the Calgary Flames, right? The Utah Mammoth have had about $6 million in cap space all season. You know how much money that's worth now? $29
Wow.
million.
Wow.
Sorry, not now, but at the trade deadline in a
You
month.
almost sounded like
29
Dr.
million.
Evil there. That was great.
Wait, hold on.
Exactly. Yeah. There you go. Well played, sir. Well
That's gonna
played.
get screen grabbed by
Yeah.
everyone. But Merry Christmas. All I gotta say is it's very possible. From what I was told, the Canadians are holding out to be able to put him in the right situation without anything having to come back to free up a roster spot and to give them a little bit more flexibility on the cap front in case there is an ad that they can make it forward.
Fantastic stuff as always. Be curious to see what happens. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel to help spread the word. Cast a brighter light on what Star and D'Amico are doing on the daily on youtube.com. And don't forget, you can listen to this on all your favorite audio podcast platforms. And you can follow us at the Star and D'Amico on all your favorite socials. And there's Marco D'Amico, the senior editor with RG Media. Marco, good stuff as always. We'll see you tomorrow for more content around the Montreal Canadiens and something you reported on as it relates to Nazem Kadri. Stay tuned tomorrow for that.